Hey, you Georgia High School football campers. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all safe, especially during these crazy times that we have here. And we're just all praying that we will have a football season, have some games to officiate. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, take a lot of your time here, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and talk to you just a little bit about sportsmanship. I know you've been in camp, the last several hours, or have you been doing this, and now you're at a point where you're doing this sportsmanship breakout. And I want to talk to you about a few things. I'm here at my home here in LJ, and it's a beautiful afternoon. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about sportsmanship. And I've got several things that I'm going to share with you. So let me grab over here to the presentation, and we'll get started, and I'll talk to you a little bit about it. So let's see if I can do this here. There we go. All right, bear with me. All right, so again, this is my contact information, name. If you have a question ever, you can always reach out to me, as many of you already know. But the title of my breakout is Sportsmanship Matters. And really, sportsmanship does matter. And as you know, that's one of the points of emphasis this year. Sportsmanship is number one. And so as officials, we should be very, very aware of that. And we all know when we see good sportsmanship, we all know when we see bad sportsmanship. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a couple of things here that will maybe help you to have a better understanding of how to recognize, how to deal with it, and also how we work through it during the game. So let's take a look at a couple of things. And this was just part of the points of emphasis, just to reiterate. When considering sportsmanship, many of you may think only of the game participants, athletes, and coaches within the time frame of the game. Although players and coaches are the most visible in their display of sportsmanship, proper sportsmanship includes public dress announcers, fans, and spectators. And we all know that sometimes spectators, especially in football, we're not necessarily in football. In basketball and sports where they're closer to us, fans can really be a problem. In football, we don't really experience that as much because they're far away from us, and we don't sometimes hear them. We will hear some of those that are on the sideline. And certainly we have all been in games in which we felt like that the sportsmanship that was being exhibited by the fans on the teams of either sideline, that it was probably crossing the line. And those are very difficult areas for us to deal with. So, but Jen, just to reiterate, sportsmanship is for everyone. During COVID-19, I've been at home a good bit, and my family will play rook from time to time. And I'll just tell you, I don't like losing. And I always say competition brings the best and worst out in people. And we play rook at home. Sometimes I'm reminded that my attitude might not be the best. That I might be more concerned about winning than I am actually, getting the opportunity to spend time with my family and play games. And I think that's part of the thing that we need to keep at bay as officials. I know that a lot of these coaches, their livelihood depends on how well their teams perform. But still, it's important who wins and who loses, but really is what matters is what's going to remember long-term is, how we play the game. And so we're going to talk just a few things about that. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is point number one is let's define what sportsmanship is. So I went to Webster's dictionary and I looked it up, and it says fair and generous behavior or treatment of others, especially in a sports contest. And we know that in the past, whenever we would walk our captains to the middle of the field, we would see the teams. A lot of times we'd see the captains, shake hands, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again one day, even though we're not necessarily, going to be shaking hands this year. But I always make sure, and we always ask the coaches, is your team properly and legally equipped? Is your team going to practice good sportsmanship? And they always answer the question, yes. And whenever we get into the middle of the field, or whenever I have meetings with captains, whether it be basketball or football, I always ask them, hey, or is everybody on your team going to practice good sportsmanship? And I always try to get an answer back from them. And I always remind them the importance of sportsmanship. In football, you certainly want to dominate your opponent. It is a contact sport, and you are going to knock them down. But I always say a good example of sportsmanship is knocking them down and picking them up. That is a great example of sportsmanship. And so when we think about, fair and generous behavior or treatment of others, especially in sports contests, that's what sportsmanship is. And, guys, for us, as we are officials, as we referee the younger youth games, the kids that are going to be the next generation of players, we need to make sure that we are doing our best to make sure that people know and understand, what sportsmanship is and how it is defined. So what is sportsmanship, and why is it important? Good sportsmanship builds teamwork. It builds character, and it teaches respect, honor, discipline, kindness, inclusion, resilience, perseverance, and more. The benefits of good sportsmanship are many. When kids enjoy active play, they look forward to sports and exercise as a chance to make new friends and develop new skills. Now, that is a great definition of what is sportsmanship and why it's important. We get that. But we know in our game today, we know those teams and those players that really are good at to knock them down and pick them up. But we also know that coaches are teaching their kids to dominate their opponent. And it's all, and when you dominate your opponent, you're more than likely going to be successful and your team is going to win. And you certainly can dominate your opponent. But how you do it and how you exercise that. And we see it a lot of times, in kids, they want to go further than what it is than just dominating their opponent. But, a lot of these kids, and we've all had those rivalry games in our areas, where these kids are playing each other and their parents have played in these rivalries, and those are big games, and and they just really, it's one, you want to be able to say, well, we beat you in this year, blah, blah, blah. You want to be able to brag about it. But the reality is, a lot of times when these kids, they graduate school, they get older, they could work together, they could go to church together, they could be in communities together, they could live in the same neighborhood. And so we want to make sure that we do our best to make sure that kids are understanding the value of sportsmanship. And that's not really how the game doesn't really want us to have enemies. Life doesn't want us to have enemies. We want to be able to play the game in the realm of good sportsmanship. So I asked the question, what is the GHSA stance on sportsmanship? It doesn't matter if we as officials, if we feel like sportsmanship needs to be addressed, and it doesn't matter what we do in our games, if we don't get the support that we need from the Georgia High School, it really doesn't matter. And so I asked the Georgia High School, what their stance was on sportsmanship, and it just so happened that there was a presentation that they were putting out that kind of tells us what their stance is. And so when I was speaking with Kevin Giddens and Ernie Arbor about this in email, Kevin sent this back to me. He said in the 2019 season, football had 232 players ejected and 10 coaches ejected. Now, it didn't give me the breakdown. We know there are situations in games, if coaches are out of their box, or if you get run into and there's contact, there's that rule about the unsportsmanlike and how that could lead to an ejection. But we're hoping that we don't know the breakdown, but this is not a bad number. Kevin did say that it was less than it was in 2018, so that's an improvement. So hopefully things are getting better. But the Georgia High School sportsmanship statement is this, and I know we've all heard it. They read it before every contest. I don't know if anybody ever listens to it, but I want to point out just a couple things, and I'm going to read this to you. The GHSA and its member schools have made a commitment to promote good sportsmanship by student athletes, coaches, and spectators at all sanctioned events. I want to point out to you, student athletes, coaches, and spectators, all right? Profanity, degrading remarks, and intimidating actions directed at officials or competitors will not be tolerated and are grounds from the removal of the event site. Spectators are not to enter the competition area during warm-ups or while the contest is being conducted. And then Dr. Hines' statement says, thank you for your good cooperation in the promotion of good sportsmanship at today's event. All right. So the question came up one time, does someone have to violate all three? Do they have to use profanity and degrading remarks and intimidating actions in order to be asked to be removed? And we're talking specifically about fans, I would think, in this particular area. And we know part of the game is fans are going to yell at us. They're gonna want things to go their way. But when fans use profanity and they want to get personal and they really use degrading remarks or intimidating actions that makes you feel like you're being threatened, that needs to be addressed. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the best way to do that is in just a few minutes. But this is basically what the sportsmanship resolution is from the Georgia High School, and this presentation is on the GHSA website. And so I just want to share this with you. The purpose of it is to provide clear guidelines for acceptable behavior of coaches, players, and spectators. 3 simple rules to follow. To get respect, you must give respect. To that you permit, you also promote. To fix it, you must face it. So for us as officials, when we go to our games, we want the coaches to respect us. We want them to appreciate what we're doing and why we're there. and we all know sometimes when we go into those games and we have that coach that has, they have a reputation, or they may be one of those coaches that just really, when the ball's kicked, they turn into a totally different person and they begin to overreact and yell and scream. Those are sometimes always challenging. And so I would just say to you that we have to figure out a way to get them to respect us. And one of the things that I've tried to do through the years is that whenever I'm talking with someone, especially about a difficult topic, look them in the eye. Let them see your eyes and look them in the eye and talk to them and try your best to maintain composure. It says that's what you permit, you also promote. So if we're going to allow them to be able to be unruly and do the things that don't promote good sportsmanship, then it's going to get worse. And so the sooner that we address it and we deal with it, the better. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit. And to fix it, you must face it. And if you got a problem, then you got to deal with it. And if you're not willing to deal with it, then you're just it's going to be a long night. It's not going to be good. So the GHSA has developed a zero tolerance for profanity of any kind, inappropriate language, racial or ethnic slurs, sexist or homophobic comments directed at an official or an opponent or not representative of the positive values of education-based education. That is such strong language for us, and that is just the support that we need. Zero tolerance. Now, that doesn't mean that if we hear someone use a slang word, that we should just automatically give them an unsportsmanlike penalty. No, that means that if they are using profanity directed at us, obviously there are some words that we don't want players to use, and if we hear it, we need to make sure that we clearly hear it. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about how that possibly you might consider dealing with that. One of the things that I've learned through the years from some mentors of mine, Doc and Nan Sist, I always hear them say, never miss the opportunity to address unsporting behavior. Address unsporting behavior. That doesn't mean it has to be penalized. It does mean that we have to address it. So when we hear that kid, using profanity or a remark that's not becoming of the game and it's not directed at an individual, we should address it. But if they're addressing it at us or at an opponent, then that is taunting and baiting, and we clearly have a rule that would support that, and the GHSA is telling us that they have zero tolerance for that. And then they say here that coaches, you're the front line. Coaches have an expected level of goodness when we're working with student athletes. They're considered role models for the young and impressionable. Good sportsmanship should never be replaced by derogatory, obscene, and distasteful actions. The behavior of coaches is directly reflected in their players and fans. I could say amen, amen, and amen to that. I've said it for years. People emulate leadership. And when you have coaches that, high-strung, yelling, screaming, then their players are going to demonstrate those same characteristics. And their fans, when they see the coaches that are just going crazy and all that, it just filters down. And so I think this is a good word for coaches. And this is something good for us to know that we have some support in this area from the GHSA. Again, I think I just read that. Okay, so let's keep going here. The game official's responsibility. Officials are the administrators of the game in accordance with the rules of playing and governing body policy. As such, they are also having expectations to conduct themselves in a professional manner. As such, officials are held to the same level of accountability in the area of sportsmanship. So that's a good word for us. All right, so not only should we be the ones that are the governing body to kind of police this activity, we should also make sure that we're conducting ourselves in a professional manner. I was once told by a friend of mine who I officiated some Division I basketball games, is that when things get tough, when things get going, the officials need to be the calming presence. Now, sometimes that's not always easy because we're the one being attacked. We're the one that they're actually coming after. They're upset with us. So it's hard for us. We feel like there's a part of us that we have to defend. And so we have to be very careful with that. And so it says we're the administrators of the game. That doesn't mean that we are the administrators of the fans, but we do have responsibility that if we have fans that are doing things that are not in accordance with the GHSA sportsmanship statement, then we should have that addressed, and we should take care of it. If we have players, if we have coaches that don't behave and don't play in order of good sportsmanship, we have ways to deal with that. we can penalize them with an unsportsmanlike foul. And we know that any combination of two unsportsmanlike players on a coach or on a player, that means they're going to be ejected, and they're going to get to go, and they're going to get to sit out another game. I'm not one big on the death penalty. I've had that happen very few times in my career as official, both in basketball and in football. But there have been times, and sometimes you just have to say, hey, coach, the timer has started. When you give them that first unsportsmanlike penalty, or when you give that player that first unsportsmanlike penalty, hey, the timer has started. Now we've got to figure out how to make this better, or the next one, you're not going to like the results of it. Neither one of us are going to like the results of that. So I think it's important here that we learn how to conduct ourselves, and that we don't add fuel to the fire, that we're not one of the reasons why we're having problems. This is a key point right here. Social media is not your friend. And they give, strict bylaws here related to that, not just for member schools, participants, and officials. We've all had that game where we want to just get on, we feel like we need to vent. Well, when you need to vent with one of your partners, vent with your mentor. Don't get on social media and decide you want to throw something out there about a particular school or particular coach or particular community. That is not good. As it's stated here, think twice before you say them, because that'll ruin your career quickly. And a lot of times, whenever you're in situations where, you do lose it or you get upset, we regret it, obviously. Even the people that commit the acts end up hopefully regretting it. But you can't take it back. You can't take time back. And so it's important that we try to maintain our composure, and that we don't do anything that would be detrimental to what we have done. There are repercussions of these actions. With every action, there is a reaction. This holds true with events of poor sportsmanship. He gives the bylaw here and outlines the penalty related to that, and addresses the potential for additional penalties for repeat offenses for schools. I know that, they send out fines if this seems to be a pattern. If a coach continues to get unsportsmanlike penalties, or players, there are certain things that they have to do, and there are fines that are levied. And so I think that's good. I think that's very strong, because sportsmanship had kind of went in a direction that probably was not good. And so now we're hoping to be able to see that improve. And hopefully during this time, if we do get to play, we'll be able to see that to be better. So in closing, players, coaches, and game officials never enter a contest with the intent of performing poorly. We need to embrace the idea that everyone involved with the game wants to perform well. When we do, the high school athletics will become an enjoyable setting where wonderful memories are being built. And the reality is, most of the games that we go to and we officiate, they're great. We have no problems. And, probably in a year from now, we don't even remember those games. But I can tell you that from experience of 30 plus years of officiating, I can remember those games in which we had sportsmanship issues. I can recall them quickly. And, and so we don't want that to be the memory that people hold on to. We want the memory of the game and the memory of what we do to be that it was a wonderful game. We may have won, we may have lost, but we create a wonderful memory for these high school students and their athletes, and even the coaches as well. So I think that's very good. So how do we as officials, when we see bad sportsmanship, how do we respond when we see good and bad sportsmanship? All right. So I am very quick to make, if I see an act of good sportsmanship by a player or by a coach or, or something, administrators, I'm very quick to be able to say, hey, that's great, and we should do that. We should make sure that we acknowledge good behavior, good sportsmanship. And, when you have that problem in the game and you've got a player that's kind of pushing the envelope, and you radio over to the side, or you get the opportunity to go to the head coach and say, hey, you know what? Number 68, he just seems like he's got a problem with everything tonight. Is he okay? Let me get him out. Let me talk to him. Let me try to address it. That always works better than us trying to address it. And so I think it's important that we make sure that when we see an opportunity to address unsporting behavior, that we try to use the coaches to help us to see that get fixed, if we can, or if we have the opportunity ourselves to say, hey, you okay, 75? Are we good? Figure out your own way. I have several comments that I've used in games that have helped, take the situation that went from something that could potentially be bad to make it good. And for them to see that, I'm human. I'm not just a guy that's in a uniform that wants to be difficult. I mean, in our society today, and I've said it for several years, people have a problem. People have issues with people in uniforms. And in some cases, that's deserving. But in most cases, it is not. And for us as football officials, when we put that uniform on, if we feel like we get power from that, that's the wrong attitude. We have the ability to be able to manage games and to administer games and the privilege to referee it. So we should not take putting on a uniform as giving us power, because if we do that, then our attitude, which wouldn't lead to good sportsmanship, is no better than those in which we exhibit. And when we see bad sportsmanship, we need to address it. We certainly need to address it. And a lot of times there are those automatics in which we just have to penalize them. And I would say any time in which you have an incident revolving around bad sportsmanship, I think it's very important that we communicate to the coach what is going on and what has happened. That'll help us, because we know that with any unsportsmanlike penalty, that is to be reported to the Georgia High School office, and there's a report that you fill out, and you need to give some details. You don't have to give the long version. It just needs to be short and to the point, and be careful with what you put in those reports, because that could be used against you, and I'm sure your signer would help you with that, but it is important that we note those. And so I would just say that when you have the opportunity to use the resources that you have related to bad sportsmanship, use that. I think that's important. And so how do we address it? How do we address unsporting behavior? How do we deal with it? The first way that well, let me just rephrase this. If the way that you look at the first way to exercise how you address it is by throwing your flag and penalizing them, I would tell you that's probably not the best way. We don't want to be a Barney Fife referee. We don't want to be looking into getting our bullet out of our pocket and throwing our flag. We don't want to be that. We want to see the situation escalate. All right. We want there to be supporting evidence with the issue of unsportsmanlike. We want everyone to be able to see it. Now, I know that, you could have a player privately, come to you, and he could use bad language, and he could be directed directly at us. And if that happens, and it needs to be penalized and flagged, then do it. But if you feel like that you can give the coach the opportunity to address the issue before you have to penalize, then that sometimes works. So here's what I did. I'm just going to give you a couple of things that I did. I did a poll on Twitter, and I asked coaches, fans, and I also asked anyone that wanted to do it, to help me out with a little bit of a poll here. So I put this online, and I got several responses back. And I said, when bad examples of good sportsmanship happen, which of the following are contributing factors? Now, I kind of expected there to be it to be higher, that someone would say poor officiating more so, but only 9 people said poor officiating. 3 people said just kids being kids. 7 said entitlement. 13 said lack of discipline by coaches. 2 said school administration. 3 people said an understanding of the rules. 1 person just said it's just out of mere competitiveness of the kids. And then 1 said the lack of discipline in kids' lives, the lack of parental discipline in kids' lives. I know you can't see that. There were 4 people that said that. But 32 said that, all of the above are part of that. And so the reality is there are a lot of elements that create unsportsmanlike conduct. And so, we have to be aware of that, And I think what I would like to say is that coaches play a huge role in how the sportsmanship of your game goes. And if you can utilize coaches to help you to fix problems, that is great. That is the path of least resistance. Ignoring it is not. The path of least resistance is try to give that coach an opportunity to fix that. And I want to say this. Remember, unsportsmanlike fouls are non-contact. They cannot involve contact. Anytime you have contact, that is a personal foul. All right. And so, but sportsmanships are non-contact fouls. And so it's important that we utilize it. And you know what? Sometimes the result that some of the grief that we get from fans and coaches, maybe even a player, is because we poorly officiated a play, or maybe we weren't having our best night. And sometimes we have to figure out how is the best way for us to to let people know, you know what, we may have missed that. We're not very good tonight. We're not having a great night. But you know what? The actions of your actions and your players' action aren't helping me at all. As a matter of fact, I used to tell a coach all the time, I said, the longer you yell at me, the worse I'm going to get because I can't concentrate. And so, you know what? Sometimes it's important you just say, you know what, coach, I think I'll do a lot better if you'll just concentrate, if you'll just allow me to be able to concentrate on my job and not yell at me. Do you like it when your wife yells at you? I don't like it when my wife never yells at me. But the reality is, you know, when people are yelling at you, you don't perform well. And so it's important. And that same thing happens with fans. And that's part of having thick skin and being able to learn how to do that. So here's one of the other things that I did with my poll. And that is when fans violate the GHSA sportsmanship statement, profanity, regrading remarks, and intimidating actions directed at officials or competitors will not be tolerated and are for grounds for removal from the event site. Which of the following way is the best way to address the issues? All right, so we had one person that said when fans violate the GHSA sportsmanship statement, they should be directed at officials, competitors are tolerated the ground, which of the following is, okay, so that's just a repeat. Sorry about that. So the first one they said was to contact game management. If it wasn't completely over the line, let the game manager attempt to address. If it continues or gets out of line, have the game manager remove the fan. So I want to speak to this specifically related to fans. All right. If you have a problem with a fan, do not seek that fan out. Don't look at that fan. Don't throw your flag. We don't throw flags on fans. We don't penalize fans. We go to the game administrator and we have them remove the fan. Try to make that happen so that the game flows. Try to make that happen the best way to keep the game flowing as possible, because if you bring attention to that, it's gonna be a big deal. So that's very important. And one of the things that was said, 30 people said keep the game moving, locate game management, and have them address and have the fan removed, which is basically what I just said. One of the options was to stop the game literally, point out the fan, get the cops, and have the fan removed, and don't play another second until the game fan is removed. 4 people said that. I would not suggest that unless it was a really bad situation. If it was a really bad situation, then that might be one of the actions which I would take. But I would only stop the game unless it was really a bad situation. I'd be careful with that. Here's one of the options I gave them: stop the game, go to the coach, and have him address the fan and have him removed. We had 7 people that said that. Don't go to the coach. The coach has no control over the fans. I mean, if that's your only out, then yes, and maybe he needs to be made aware of it. But the coach is primarily focused on coaching his players and taking care of his players. And so it's very important that we don't try to get the coach involved. We let the game administrators and the game fans. And that's why it's important that we know who those game administrators are on both sidelines so that those things can be addressed. And then the last one was use discretion. Not everything can fit into a category. If the comments make warn, then toss them. If not, then a warning to both teams. That was just an individual making a comment, kind of stating that, you know what, sometimes we know we have issues with multiple players. And we see it a lot in football. We have kids going back and forth at each other, and we can address those. Sometimes fouls are necessary, and we just have to, and maybe the timer does need to be started. But it's not like, that sometimes that's not really gonna fix the problem. So does this only apply to players, coaches, and fans? Well, from a GHSA sportsmanship statement, yes. But from our perspective, it does not. That includes us, And what I really wanted to talk about here was from an area of sportsmanship is how do we do from our own competitive side of things? We're all competing. We're all in a playoff camp. We all want to succeed. We all want to make a state championship. How is our sportsmanship? How is our attitude? How are we towards our peers and our friends that do well? Do we have a bad attitude? Do we blame it on the system? Do we blame it on the GHSA? Or do we say, well, they're getting it because of this, or that? No, we shouldn't do that. We should be good examples of good sportsmanship as well. So I just wanted to challenge you guys with that, to make sure that your heart and your head, your heart and your attitude is in the right place as it relates to displaying good sportsmanship within our own competitive nature as officials. Yes, the GHSA sportsmanship statement does apply to players, fans, and coaches, but I can assure you Coaches know those officials that have bad attitudes and don't really exhibit good sportsmanship and professionalism in their own life, as well as our peers in the officiating ranks. And so it's important that we make sure that we do that as well. And so the conclusion is, well, I want to do one other thing here before I conclude. I want to stop sharing this. I want to look at the rule book just for a moment, just to give you some examples of what we should be doing as it relates to that. And then I'm going to show you some clips of some fights that happened, some issues, some examples of bad sportsmanship. So non-contact, unsportsmanlike conduct by players. No player shall act in an unsportsmanlike manner once the game officials assume authority for the contest. Examples are not limited to baiting or taunting acts or words or insignia worn which engenders ill will. We all know what that is. We don't want people to be baited. We should not allow that, and we should we should address that. And we know we have certain things that kids do in the end zones or as they're running in the field during live ball play. Unsportsmanlike fouls are always penalized as dead ball fouls, generally from the succeeding spot. And so it's important that we know what those are. The National Federation gives us some examples as well. Profanity, insulting or vulgar language or gestures, any delayed or excessive or prolonged act by which the player attempts to focus attention on himself, using disconcerting acts or words prior to the snap in an attempt to interfere with A signals or movements. So we know that's one of the new rules this year. That is a disconcerting act. But it still falls under the category of unsportsmanlike, even though it's only a 5-yard penalty. Kicking the ball other than during a legal kick, leaving the field between downs to gain an advantage unless replaced or unless with permission of game officials. So those are refusing to comply with game officials' request, using alcohol, blah, blah, blah. So then it kind of tells you a little bit more about some other acts when the ball, intentionally kicking the ball, spiking the ball, throwing the ball high into the air, intentionally fall to place the ball on the ground. And then it gives us the examples. It tells us what it is. It's a 15-yard penalty, and it's unsportsmanlike conduct. So I just wanted to share that with you just for a moment and let you take a look at that. Let's see if I can get off of that now. Stop share. Now I want to let you watch a few play clips here of some examples last year that we saw in games where we had unsporting behavior that took place. So let's see if I can get this to work. All right, so we're going to watch this play here. We're going to see that, it's kind of a busted place. We see the 44 and 12 here, a little pushing and shoving. Then somebody kind of goes up to the head, and then we got flags flying, and then we got stuff going on. The officials are doing a pretty good job here of staying back, and looks like one of the deeps is getting his card out, writing things down. The line judge is doing a good job here trying to keep people. I don't know these people that are coming out the sidelines there, but that was – that was a fairly good example of ways to handle that. But as you can see, this looks like a busted play, and it kind of started right there with those two. The one thing that I could say is that maybe they could run in there a little bit and try to help that situation. A lot of time, and the referee's doing a good job trying to get people to stay back. If we just blow our whistle, pop, 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 sometimes that's not helpful. That kind of might incite, problems. But anyway, that's one example. Then here's another example. Watch this one here. Again, a lot of times these hands from near the sideline, and he's going to get an interception. And then, that was unnecessary. So now they're going to many throws. Obviously, we've got ejections here for fight. And then we just got a big mess going on. So that was a big problem there. With that really probably, I don't know what happened after that. Obviously, the video cut off, but I'm sure that wasn't a very good situation. This is another example here. So we can see here, we've got, kids coming together, the officials and then we got a referee throwing a flag here. I would just say that, throwing a flag is important, but a lot of times when we throw our flags, and I'm not saying this official did that, it kind of shows our disgust. We don't necessarily have to have a flag on the ground to have unsportsmanlike. We can do that after the fact. We get together and we talk about it. But again, let's watch here. The guys are doing a pretty good job of keeping things separated. so we've got, some of the players that kind of walked out there. And I celebrated here just a little bit. He's happy with that. And now we're trying at the end of the game here. This game is going to end. And then watch what happens. So the game is over. The officials are leaving. And then watch what happens. Now, question is, do we have any authority at this point? Do officials have any authority at this point? If something happens here when we've not left the visual confines of the field, we're on our way. Certainly, we're not going to have flags on this play, but we would fill out a GHSA game report. Watch what this crew does. I'm not really sure that we should be, when the game is over, we should leave. We should observe, watch, let the Georgia High School deal with this after the fact. Then we can share, but I don't really think we should be involved with trying to stop what's going to transpire here. So you're going to see this is the blowing the whistle. The referee is putting himself in a very awkward spot here because you have no idea what's getting ready to transpire. This could really turn into a bad situation here. And I would like to, I don't know what I'd do if I were in this situation. I would like to think that I would be gone because this game is over. The thing is, you're going to see, and again, I'm not faulting this crew, I'm just trying to, you're going to see, now the game is over, and now we're trying to exercise some form of authority here, writing things down, and now the coach is going to walk over there, and he's going to try to talk to him, and, so, I mean, this is a difficult situation here. I think this game is over. The officials probably should not have even been on the field. We should be letting game administrators and the GHSA be working this out with them after the game. You see here the referee is going to talk to the coach now. I'm not really sure, what responsibility, what they think they're going to do here because the game is over. And so anyway, that's just a good one. And then here's another situation where we have something near the sideline, I believe. And we have a little bit of action that takes place. We have some pushing and some shoving. And so, which kind of leads to more. We got flags flying. Again, these are tough situations, and so I'm not really sure if the referees know who they're throwing their flags on or if they're just throwing their flags to let people know we're going to have some penalties here. I don't know that that's actually necessary. Whether you got flags on the ground or not, there's going to be some people that are ejected. This crew does a pretty good job of stepping back and not trying to be involved in it. Matter of fact, and they did a good job. But it's important that when you have these types of situations that you're writing numbers down and you're trying to get an idea. It's tough. It's a very tough situation. Now we got coaches coming out and they're going at each other a little bit here. And so these are very tough situations. Very tough situations. All right. So those are just a couple of clips that I wanted to share with you. Related to very difficult situations with fights. So just to conclude my presentation here, let me see if I can get back to where I need to get back to. Sorry. Thank you for bearing with me. Certainly would be a lot better if we were in person doing this. So my conclusion is this. When it happens, when bad sportsmanship happens, it's important how we respond to it. It really does matter how the game is played, regardless of who wins or loses. Everyone loses when the game is not played with good sportsmanship. As I mentioned earlier, when you have situations like those video clips that we just said, people are going to talk about it for a while. That's going to be one of the first things they're going to want to go back to. And so some of those things in those games right there, there's probably very little that we could have done as officials to change that. We don't know what happened leading up to that. But it is important that as officials that we recognize the importance of sportsmanship. Sportsmanship does matter, and it is important that we make sure that we are the calming presence, try to be the calming presence as it relates to sportsmanship. So, guys, I just want to leave you with this. Bible says, love your neighbors yourself. And if we practice good sportsmanship, we certainly will know how to do that. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be able to give you this session. Hopefully you'll walk away from here with something. And just always remember, sportsmanship matters. Have a good year. God bless.